All right, welcome to all of you on Facebook Live. I'm Harry Grammer, president of PGIAA, and this is our newest endeavor, live from somewhere where we will feature a bi-monthly web broadcast highlighting various projects and offering a closer glimpse into the contributions of Pacifica alums around the world. Join us each episode, meet members of the PGIAA board and other guests, then step into worlds where our PGIA family is thriving. Live from somewhere is a brainchild of our alumni relations director, Diane Travis Teague, who strongly believes that alumni need a special place to gather, especially after especially after this year-long pandemic that we've just endured. This is a place where we will have the opportunity to show off the genius of our community and share ideas, accomplishments, possibilities emerging from Seoul. And this episode today is very special because we're here to celebrate fatherhood as we step into Father's Day weekend. Let's first start by saying Happy Father's Day to all of you who identify with the role of father. May this be a very special weekend. And I in preparation for this talk today, I did a little bit of research on Father's Day. Because that's what we do as psychologists. We research almost everything. And if you didn't know already, the history, here it is. Father's Day was first founded in Spokane, Washington at the YMCA in 1910 by Sonora Smart Dodd, who was born in Arkansas. Its first celebration was in the Spokane YMCA on June 19th, 1910. Her father, a Civil War veteran, William Jackson Smart, was a single parent who raised 6 children there. And being very proud of her father, she started to campaign to make Father's Day a federal holiday. So for about 60 years following 1910, several people tried to establish Father's Day as a national holiday and failed. I didn't know that. And until Lyndon B. Johnson uh, marked it as a holiday, um, and then Nixon signed into law in 1972. Um, that's when Father's Day was established as a national holiday and as a federal holiday. So it took 60 years. And today, there are new emerging definitions of fatherhood. So tonight will be a sort of short but sweet conversation between the four of us as we bring a depth psychological perspective into the space. And I'm honored here today to share the mic with three other brilliant PGIAA board members. I'll introduce Leslie. Dr. Leslie Shore is an end of life midwife, a death doula, home funeral guide, and a Tahara ritual leader who serves the dying and their families. She performs funerary ritual and is an officiant. She has worked in death and dying professionally for more than 2 decades. After being called to the work itself as a child, Leslie is passionate about bringing Americans closer to death, awareness, education, and preparedness, speaking at colleges and universities around the world to educate people about the healing aspect of using ancient ritual ceremony in modern bereavement. She earned her doctorate in mythological studies at Pacifica in 2013, where she focused on Japanese traditions and culture using the films of Hayao Miyazaki. I'm sure I butchered that. To explore ways to build a more cooperative nation and world. Leslie serves as PGIAA's serves on our executive board at PGIAA and advisory board. Prior to her PhD, she was an award-winning reporter and news anchor, TV, radio, and print. For 5 years, she's published her own century-old community newspaper, Leslie left the TV news business after growing concern about the callous treatment of grieving survivors on news stories where deaths had occurred. And she is grateful for her graduate degree and feels that PGI prepared her to work on a profound soul level with dying persons through archetypal identification, mythic resonance, and multicultural understanding. And we also have with us today Min Tran, MA, LMFT, and he is a graduate of Pacifica Graduates Institute's MA in Counseling Psychology program. After graduating in 2017, Min completed his commitment to working for the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, LAC, DMH, in community mental health settings in order to complete his MFT consortium stipend and his marriage and family therapist associateship licensure. And in 2018, Mr. Min received a scholarship to attend, and as of early 2019 has completed uh, the psychedelic assisted therapies and research postgraduate certificate program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I want to talk to you about that too, man. Anyways, Mr. Min is currently living and working in Denver metropolitan area, and has started work towards a PhD in depth psychology with a specialization in integrative therapy and healing practices at Pacifica Graduate Institute. And next is Donna May. Donna May, MA, MFT, lives and works in beautiful Siskiyou County, California. Beautiful up there, very beautiful. She has been a therapist, drug and alcohol administrator, consultant, dream worker, teacher, an educator, and writer. Story Tender describes her at the best. After years of working with traditional and county agency settings, she has spent the last 10 years focused on bringing dreams, writing, and storytelling to both local and online communities. Donna's mission is to tend, facilitate, and be a healing witness to those emerging dreams and studies and stories that are important to individuals and the community in which they live. She is honored to be a, a graduate of Pacifica Graduate Institute and a PGIAA board member, and one of many committed to tending the soul of the world. So today, we're gonna get right into the conversation here on fatherhood, and as we get started, I want to just dive right in, and I want to dive right in with a question to men, and would love, to get your perspective on what's, the world today. Uh, so what archetype men do you see playing out in society today in relationship to fatherhood?
Well, Harry, in my practice as a therapist, um, and also from just what I'm hearing with other clinicians, I love this Jungian podcast, this Jungian Life podcast, with Joseph Lee, who speaks really eloquently recently about the archetype of the king that some therapists are noticing reemerging in the collective psyche as we see more boys and men coming in with symptoms of issues around sexual shame. Um, so I would say the archetype of the king seems to be the one that is reemerging itself.
Hmm. The archetype of teen. So go into that a little deeper. Where do you see that playing out? In the world and in our society. I know that a lot of folks would say, well, it's alive and well in politics. But where else do you see it, or in addition to politics, where do you see it playing out?
Mhm. Well, obviously in the clinical consulting room, in politics, but I think the example that was brought in was the things going on college campuses, all the sexual assaults that are reported now, rightfully so. However, I think, well, to answer your question, there's something about, I'm pretty invested in redeeming the patriarchy.
Mhm.
And I think it comes with some kingly energy, where it's about taking responsibility, but you can't strip that from a sense of authority and resource to do something about it. And so I think the archetype of the king is sort of like gathering it all back so that I think men will have more ability to even take responsibility, if anything. So coupling it with some things that have been stripped away and are missing, and namely, I think authority and resource.
Mm.
So I don't know if that answered your question, but I mean, college campuses was the example that was used in the podcast. But in my experience, it's I have an eye on what's going on with the nation. And actually, when the archetype of the king was first discussed, and I started hearing about it sort of arising in the collective, it was with the election of our current president, the archetype of the good king, kind of reemerging itself. And so I have an eye on, I have a pulse on politics, so I would have to stick with that.
Yeah, so was it? Did it feel like, I sort of remember a lot of the Lord of the Rings, movies and books back in the day, and the Return of the King, and just right when you said that, it just popped into my mind, and I, I'm curious, where did you see that? When you say king, and what does a king mean to you? When you think of king, when you think of that image, what comes up for you? What do you think about?
Mhm. Well, lately I think it's the King of Cups from the tarot deck.
Mm,
It's a king with heart, I think, it's what's needed right now.
mm.
King of Cups.
King of Soul sounds like, definitely. Wow. And Donna, what do you think of when you think of the term father? What comes up for you?
Well, the first thing I think about is my own father. And we had talked a little bit about this a little bit earlier, that when I think of my father, I think of the archetype of John Wayne, because that, is a post-World War II veteran, blue collar, hard worker, with a sense of having to be stoic, don't show emotions, and a very, very narrow idea of fatherhood, which had to do with working hard, making a living for his family, but very disengaged a lot with day-to-day experiences with us as kids and with my mother. Um, and that's what I think of. And I think of his father, my grandfather, an alcoholic. And, I come from a long line of alcoholics, and I've come to have some great empathy for my grandfather, my father, and others in my family that really had this, that they weren't allowed to have their emotions or feelings, or really even hold to a vision of their heart and their soul of what they want to do with their life. They were just like really focused, hyper focused on what they thought they should be, what a good man does, what a good father does. And you know that's what I think about. And as we reimagine here within adept psychology in this space, I'm really curious to know what the gentleman and also Leslie, what comes up for you about that, because part of the reclaiming of the good king, so to speak, is where it's not this hyper masculinity that is about destruction and control and power over, and yet and devoid of any capacity to kind of be more aligned with what's in their soul. Like, for instance, my grandfather, he would sit around the table drunk and he would recite poetry and he would sing. He really had that Scot Irish soul about him. And yet, day to day, that was not allowed. There was nothing allowed that was soft
Hmm.
or inviting or engaging. And so um, that's what that's what I think of when I think of father. Father. and fatherhood?
It reminds me a lot of my father too. My father growing up, my father was very quiet, and he worked a lot. My father, when I woke up in the morning, he was gone. When I went to sleep at night, he was gone. He was working 2 to 3 jobs. We grew up, fairly, I would say low income, south side of Chicago. Um, Father had a few jobs and Vietnam veteran, and we were distant. There was very little connection that I had with my father growing up. When he came home, it was either to you know be a disciplinarian in a lot of ways, and my mother did most of the nurturing, and then my father, and that translated later to me really having a deep desire to have my father present in my life, and at the same time wanting a role model for how to be a father later to my children. I was a young father, so I became a father at 18 years old as well, and what I wanted to avoid immediately was, that absentee fatherness, and for my son, at that time, and there was a desire from my family for me to go on and, and go to big colleges and play, big sports, which I turned down a lot of that. I stayed local for college. I didn't go off to a D1 school to play sports like they wanted me to. I turned down multiple scholarships, and that was very disappointing for my parents. And so much so that we were estranged for about 8 years after that, and until my father was, my father had a really incredibly large heart attack, which that put him into a coma for 3 weeks, and it was inside of the coma that something must have spiritually, magically, mystically happened to my father, because when he came out of the coma, he called me to the hospital right away, and I really hadn't talked to my father much before that time, and the thing he wanted to tell me most was that he loves me. And it was the first time, and I was 26 years old, the first time I had ever heard my father tell me he loved me. And there is something in that dynamic of hearing him say that and knowing he means that, and looking into his eyes and seeing a person who had changed because of this, what had to be a mystical experience of going into this, near death, afterlife, wherever he was, that he had some realizations. There was a moment where something within me clicked, like I got it. There was an exchange. There was a transmission of some sort of acknowledgement, where I picked up this new sense of being alive, and it was almost transformative just by hearing those words, and it reminded me this morning. I was at my office, and I run an agency for youth, in Los Angeles, California, and these are young people who are traveling through the justice system, formerly incarcerated young people who are aging out of foster care and really don't have a place to go. Well, we take those kids in. These are the kids that folks, usually want to throw away and say, we're not going to waste our time on them. They're not going to be anyone. Well, we pull them in. And this morning I was in an intervention. I was just telling Donna and Donna and Leslie before the show, I led an intervention today for a young man who has been, has had a really terrible substance use issue with crystal methamphetamine, and we brought his family in, and we had our staff there, and it was about 8 of us in the room, as we conducted this intervention, and just to see the dynamic between he and his father. And what I knew in that moment, all that young man needed to hear from his father, because there was a lot of just conflict in the room. He needed to hear what I heard when I was 26 years old. He needed to hear his father say, "I love you." That's all he needed. And I can feel that if that would have happened, and it didn't, and we pray that it does, or something happens between that dynamic, because I feel that that's really at the baseline of what's going on in his addiction. I think that there could be probably some real big breakthroughs at that point. So fatherhood, and fathers who have been absent, a lot of times it's generational too, and so just having being able to step back and evaluate, and then also letting our fathers off the hook in a lot of ways too, saying, hey, you know what, you know, I'm conscious enough to know that, you know, he just didn't know how to do this thing, you know, the way that I would love to have seen it done. And I can forgive my father for what he didn't bring into my life, or I can love my father for who he is and who he isn't as well, right? And so, you know, there's that sense of appreciation. Yeah. So Leslie, I want to go to you, and I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you, you know, what changing images of gender do you see your family embrace?
Well, my family's interesting in that I'm a really old family here. We started out as settlers in 1884, and my great grandfather was not quite John Wayne, but a real different kind of strong frontiersman, if you will. But he was one of these good kings that Min talks about. And I'll tell you why I believe this is true. I believe this is true because he was not an insecure man at all. He had earned mastery in his life, so that when he and I got to know each other, he was innately confident and calm about who he was. It was a quiet inner confidence. And I've not seen that in recent years, certainly not in the media in the same way. You know, things have a sort of, like Donna said, a hypermasculinity, or, you know, some people use wounded masculine or toxic masculine. So that's how I came into the world, was through this Scotch-Irish bloodline, quite frankly. But at the same time, he wasn't macho. He just was calm in the world. He could, you know, he hunted his own food because that's what he needed to do. He was a fisherman, he was an angler, he was all those things, but he was also careful about the resource and protected it. He was not hyper masculine, he simply was. Now, flash forward to my life now in 2021, and my great grandfather died at nearly 100 when I was in undergraduate school, so that was about 81 or 2. So flash forward now today, and in our family, we have a trans person who is Papa as well as they, because both female and male resonate with my in-law. And I want to be careful about names because we're recording. I want to be, you know, identity careful. But what I learned from the person who married my stepdaughter is that it's really hard to know how to identify as a parent who feels both masculine and feminine. And so in our family, we are very careful to use the pronouns that are appropriate and that are respectful. And we're continuing to grow and change and transform with definitions and language, because we're still finding our way as well, as a family and as a nation too, in all of these issues across gender, culture, creed, color, everything. So the fluidity of this, the expansiveness, the spaciousness, I believe is a really helpful thing. I think that it really helps us, because when we look at today's parenting, fatherhood, however, whatever definition we want to use, we need to understand that it is shifting and transforming at all times. And I believe that social media and the digital world has made us progress that much faster in some places, not in others. So, you know, I think that Americans really need to embrace all definitions of fatherhood, all definitions of parenthood, all definitions of masculinity. And when we do that, there's not so much of a confined pinching pattern, if you will.
May I?
Yes.
Yes.
May I bring in my own father real quick in relating to that, because my father was more of a mother, I realize now, for me, because he really stepped in and played that role, because my own mother was not able to. So I really appreciate that, Leslie, the fluidity of it, the spaciousness, because I think that's how, so Vietnam has this interesting, we're historically matriarchal, and then and then that got subverted due to Chinese patriarchal influence historically. But women often will still hold the money in the household. They'll still find ways to hold the power. And so my father found his ways around that to be able to offer me some mothering, actually, my biological father. So, and he passed away last year. That's why I wanted to bring him in. He, right as the pandemic was about to take off, he decided to take off too. But he's in my heart and he's still around, and I just wanted to bring him in real quick and relate to that.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you, thank you. Is it so? Do you see that prevalent in Vietnam? You know, sort of the father taking on that role, and in a sense, is that throughout?
I see that a lot with Vietnamese Americans. Certainly with my extended family, women often will be in charge of the household in a lot of ways. Finances, deciding, my mother decided, when we moved across state lines and things like that. And my father did the cooking. And a lot of, he was more relaxed. I wouldn't say he was emotional, but he was more relaxed. So it was easier to be around him than my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yes, I mean, I think that there's something about the way things are set up culturally that allows Vietnamese men to often offer some mothering to children.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And does it have a name? Does that name there in any way? Is it recognized that way? Meaning, here in the States, I don't think we've kind of, with I'll just say in California, we've got, a 50% divorce rate. There's a lot of, single parents raising children, covering both roles, right? And it seems to be named more of just just a pandemic of losing a parent, and it seems to be named as a negative thing here in the United States, right? And just and where it's been going on for so long, and it's so prevalent in so many ways that it just hasn't been given or shaped with a new sort of identity of what that relationship is, right? And just wondering if it's been sort of recognized and appreciated there in Vietnam in any way.
That's a great question. I can't think of one.
Like I'm just thinking about, we're celebrating this weekend, Father's Day, which is a national holiday and is uplifted as, Father's Day. And I'm thinking, are there any single parent day, or in that being honored, and in the folks that are in that role carrying both sides of it in that way, sort of an honoring instead of I think in a lot of ways, I wouldn't call it shaming here in the United States, but I mean, it's if you're a single parent, it's like you're not supposed to be, right? You're supposed to go find another person to fill that role. I think that's still kind of in the air a little bit, and it's not, and it leaves a single parent with like, oh, there's something missing here. Where, and with deep within, they may be thinking, no, actually, I'm whole and complete. I can do this. I don't need other, to come in and take a spot here. I can sort of do this. So I'm just, what are your thoughts? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a great point that you're making, that under the umbrella of calling it Father's Day, there are a lot of amazing individuals that are parenting alone and holding all the different types of, I want to say, qualities, as well as what they're supposed to do for their children under their care. and that don't get that recognition that that they are both father and mother.
Yeah.
I love your idea about that idea of like the expansion of an honoring of a parent day,
Right.
if you
Yes.
will,
I love that. Yeah. Parent Day. Just that right there. I love it. Wow.
Maybe there will be one. I know Juneteenth became a national holiday yesterday or something, right?
It did. It finally got recognized. And so many people are discovering what it is. I've been following Twitter the last few days, and folks are like, "What? I never knew this. What does this mean?" And it's if you're a Black American, you've known about this, most of your life. Most of us have been raised in it. We know that this weekend is the big barbecue weekend, and so it's really great to see, so many folks are starting to come into that space. And then it's Twitter, of course, so then you also see all the other stuff that comes along with it. But it is something to celebrate, and finally it was turned into a national holiday. I heard from some folks today, we had given our staff the day off, even though they came in for this intervention today, which I was so happy that they did, and I said, look, I can do this alone. And like, no, we're coming in, we're going to be there with you. But I'm just surprised at how many other companies didn't give the day off. I was just hearing so many stories from so many people. No, they didn't give us a day off. They said, oh, we'll do it next year. We'll do it next year. Too short of a notice. I was like, oh, okay. So, we'll see. Juneteenth is here now. So we're really happy about that.
Well, Harry, you're a father yourself, aren't you?
Yes. So I'm a father. I have 5, ranging from 27 to 7. So my oldest is 27. My youngest, she just turned 7 about 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So it's an interesting journey. It's being a father is, no one hands you a roadmap, just like, motherhood. No one hands you a book and say, here's how you do it. You learn along the way. I've got 2 older in their 20s. I've got one, he's a teenager now, and being a teen now compared to being a teen 10 years ago it's night and day, so uh, the tech piece, the technological piece is so much more advanced now. I watched my son type, on his computer. He's never taken a typing class in his life, right? And it's just like he just knows this keyboard, like, and it's just what he was born into. Me, I had to take typing classes, my freshman and sophomore year in high school to at least, and I still am like, I don't know, 20 words a minute. I don't know. But he's just typing away, and he's on, they did Zoom for the last year. He knows how to hack into my computer and phones. I mean, they just know all this stuff. So like it's a very interesting time to be raising kids right now, because they are wildly insanely wise when it comes to technology. So it's incredible. But what about, let's talk a bit about, just what do we see changing in society, in regards to parenting or fathers. Leslie, you brought up, yes, please.
I wanted to mention that recently in Ecuador, there was an interesting case with parenting across different gender constructs, because there was a person who's trans, who identified as father, who gave birth to a baby in Ecuador. And so that sort of stretched some of the, constructs within Ecuadorian culture, and they're still, assessing all of that. But I think that one of the biggest things that's changing is that the roles of parenting are changing in entire ways. Like, mothers are now breadwinners, predominant breadwinners. There's a conservative member of Congress whose naval officer husband stays home and takes care of all the children there. And he's phenomenal as a father, mother, partner, caretaker, however you want to look at it. So I think that's a real change, to have somebody in the Republican Party who's staying home taking care of children. And there are more and more and more men doing it, than we know. And Democrats don't know that these shifts are happening in other places as well across the political spectrum. It's interesting. So that's really societal shifting as well. So, and the other thing I would say is that my husband's an amazing father and mother at the same time. When I went off to Pacifica to go to graduate school, my daughter, our fourth child together, was only 8 years old. And so he really stepped up and took care of all of, on top of being the primary breadwinner at that time, because I'd sold my newspaper by then. So, here we are in a situation where I come in off a plane from a Pacifica class and I see him, rocking my daughter, reading a book, and also stirring something on the stove. It's like all these things at once. And I think that men are amazing in this role if we give society a chance to be expansive in this. Men are really wonderful parents. So
what do you think might be stopping that? I mean, why are we as society not allowing that to be an image, yet? I mean, is it that we're just really hanging on to this patriarchal identity? Just really, yeah.
I mean, I think that, one of the things I focused on in my dissertation was the conquering hero paradigm, which is pretty much out of control in America, which also makes it hard to elect a woman president because they don't swagger and conquer in the same way that Odysseus does, if you understand that sort of mythically and metaphorically. So I think once we expand more on our idea of what the new king is, I think we have a better chance of opening things wide up for a lot of participation.
Do you think that it needs to be king? I mean, could okay.
It could just be leader. The word authority is actually not about force or power. Its origin story is from the Greek, which means autor, which meant to promote ideas. So it doesn't always, it's like all this stuff shifts, and it doesn't have to be, just force and driven and media driven. And I think media totally reinforces this archetype because they sell more demographically. You sell more beer if a guy who's in his 20s feels even more powerful.
But I feel like that may be shifting now a lot, given the pandemic, and just given how much is shifted and how different society just feels in many ways, and as more people aren't going into the office, and that we're becoming more flat in the world, and people can work from anywhere, and there seems to be a desire or a push, and hopefully it sticks around, for a more equitable playing field, at least in the workspace. You know what I mean? I think I've noticed that quite a bit, and just without all the big sporting events happening, well, they're starting to happen again, but it was kind of nice for sports not to dominate. I love sports, don't get me wrong, but our culture, it dominates our cultures, in a lot of ways. It even distracts us from what's important, and so much so that we want to watch in these gladiators on the field, and on the basketball court, but we came back to family in so many ways. During that time, I got closer to my children than I could ever imagine. I was, we set up Zooms in their bedrooms, and we were doing, work, and I learned, I was able to observe how my children learn and how they take in information, and was able to work with them. It was just, family came together, and I'm just hoping that as we go back to, normal from abnormal, or we hold on to some of that, right? What do you all think?
Yeah, I think so too.
I think so too. I think, back to your question that you started that with, Harry, is I think there's a tremendous amount of fear that as the culture changes, and it's changing so rapidly, it feels like to me that there's a subpopulation that feels very fearful that about that because of their beliefs, how they were raised, and I think that's why we have this archetype of the father that is like authoritarian. The authoritarianism. There's like a backlash about that on the political stage, certainly in one aspect, while we have another political figure that is moving more in to be a good father, softer, all those things. But the culture, is moving. And like my husband, we were watching some of the more of the extreme kind of violence that was happening in different ways over, especially the last year. And I get upset about what's happening within it politically. And he'll say, all they're doing is they're afraid. And the kids, though, are leading the way. The kids are not afraid as much.
That's right.
Right? They're more open to diversity in all its forms, from how you define parenthood to people of different faiths and ethnic backgrounds and religions and colors and cultures, that they're more inclusive. And so it's us fogies that are having a hard time.
Yeah, we are.
Me.
Our reality is just so fixed. Our reality is, we come into this world, it's so fixed. The generational push to have our education, our vocation, the way we move through life be so fixed. I just read an article today that, the American dream to buy a house is no longer, right? Like, so things are so fluid now. And I think, it's something I want to talk to men about, is just, from your work and what I just announced in your bio. Like, I'm just thinking about, you just got your certificate in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. That's huge. We can talk all day on that. I know that work as well. So, and I'm thinking about Timothy Leary, and I think about, his dream to get psychedelics out into the world in the 1960s, but he kind of went haywire with it a little bit. But just to kind of loosen up, like to lubricate society in such a way so then we can be a little bit more fluid and not get so stuck, and fixed on particular norms, right? And just thinking about, what do you think, for the future, because psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is coming. It's coming very fast. I follow the MAPS organization and what they're doing, as the MDMA trials are just about complete, phase 3, and then we've got psilocybin right behind it. This is going to be in the mainstream. It's going to be used in clinical settings, like in therapy, and but also California right now, the governor it's up for signature for SB 519, which is to decriminalize all psychedelics here in California, and it'll probably pass. So we're looking at these particular tools are getting ready to move out into society. Do we see, or do you see, or I'll just say this, how do you see, the psychedelics and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy also, changing and shifting and helping us to get a little bit more fluid, or do you not?
Well, during my training, we took note that we saw videos of some participants in the research, and what happens with most of the male patients towards the end is they grow their hair long.
Wow, I love it. There's a reason for that. You're free.
So I don't know what that means. Yeah. But I did have a thought when Donna was talking about the idea that with archetypes, right, you could couple an archetype. So like puer, senex, or like masculine, feminine, and then there's the idea of sort of the embracing the fullness, or getting to the fullness of each individual archetype. So the dark side, the light side is one way to kind of. There's different ways, I think, of experiencing the fullness of an archetype. But that's another route, I think, to think about when we think about, like, clinically in the consulting group, kind of broadly cultural kind of diagnoses as well, is diagnosis and treatment is, I like the idea of fluidity and structure. And collapsing everything into sameness bothers me for some reason. But rigidity and sort of silos also bother me. So there's the ability to move around is a good way to think about it. And I mentioned that because I was thinking about the coupling of archetypes and the fullness, the making fullness techniques. And the fullness technique is really an individuation thing. You know, you make something more uniquely itself, which isn't collapsing it into sameness, which is what I see a lot of the trends of a lot of the way we think about. A lot of postmodern ways of thinking tends to want to collapse everything into some kind of fluid sameness or something, which I think is slightly different from Jung's idea of individuation. And differentiation too, like Murray Bowen's idea of differentiation as well, if folks are familiar with that. Yeah. But the psychedelics thing, I don't know, the long hair, I obviously.
I mean, I got my hair is actually tucked behind my shirt, but I've got very long hair here.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
Yeah. My hair is pretty long. Yeah. Leslie.
I don't know how much time we've got left, but
Sure.
When I think about expansiveness of images and we talk about psychedelics, then we think about breaking molds in our mind. What we can envision, what we can reimagine may also be expanded under other substances. We know there's been a ton of studies. So, but it's just all to say that as long as we can imagine a world that is different, a society that's different, we have a better chance of expansiveness. But just two last pieces. One is that we were talking earlier about the fact that psychology doesn't really have a healthy baseline on what good masculinity is in a society culturally. So that's something to think about. Maybe we can all reimagine. If we don't have that a fixed form yet, maybe we can all be a part of a definition. And the second thing is that when I think of fatherhood, and the positive fathers I've had in my lifetime have all been positive fathers of action. It's, always been parenting through fun and play and adventure. And of course, we can do that across gender and across parenting, but I think that's a really nice contribution to say about parenting on Fatherhood Day and Fatherhood Weekend. So.
Thank you, Dr. Leslie. Anyone else have any last thoughts before we head out? And this was our very first live from somewhere. And, I love this discussion. Thank you for all of your insight, your wisdom. I'm looking forward to more in the future. Let's do this again, right? Let's keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
I just want to thank you all, and happy Father's Day to everyone out there that identify as father. May you have a blessed, beautiful weekend. Thank you all for joining us today. Take care, everybody.
Happy Father's Day, Harry.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.